Hey guys, Vincent here from the creativedojo.net. Today in this video, I just wanted to share with you guys how I created this galaxy nebula within After Effects, primarily using Trapcode Particular, and I got a lot of questions on it, so I thought I would answer them in this video tutorial. Now, I always find that these things are very interesting to create just because space objects like these kind of got me into After Effects to begin with. And I never really found a great resource to how to create these kind of space objects or nebula, galaxies, stuff like that. So in this tutorial, let's just take a look at how I created this very motion graphic like galaxy here. So first things first, let's go ahead and create a new composition. And I will name this galaxy. And we'll just make it 720p and hit OK. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import a space background here. Now you can create these using Trapcode Forum, Trapcode Particular. You can create it using fractal noise. It's pretty much just a black solid layer with a whole bunch of white dots to kind of simulate kind of a space starfield environment here. And I'll just make it a 3D layer. I'll push it back and then scale it up just to kind of create a very basic fake 3D environment. Just so that we have our nebula in kind of a star field here. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new null object. And I'll call this one controller. And I'll make it a 3D layer. And let's just go ahead and position it in the center here. And let's go ahead and create 3 lights. So a new light, we'll call this one emitter 1. And we'll duplicate it. And then we'll duplicate it one more time, and we'll call this one null light factory. Of course, you can use optical flares. We'll get more into this a little bit later, but let's go ahead and go to the position here, and we'll just zero the Z axis out so it's kind of flat. And we'll go into the material options, hit AA for the space background, and we'll just turn off accept lights to off so it won't affect our background here. And so let's go ahead and set this little rig up here. So I have my controller null object here. I want to place the anchor point in the center here. So we'll just get the pan behind tool here and just move the anchor point to kind of the center of the square here. It doesn't have to be specific. And let's go ahead and position our lights. So for emitter 1, I want to place it kind of above the cube here, the square. And then for emitter 2, I guess I'll just put it below the square here. And again, it doesn't have to be exact. And for the null light factory light, we'll just go ahead and place it in the middle here. So in order, we have emitter 1 on top, we have null light factory in the middle, and then we have emitter 2 on the bottom here. So then once we have that set up, let's go ahead and parent all of our lights to our controller null object. That way, if we hit R on the keyboard and we can rotate our null object, you can see that it also rotates the light. And then you can kind of see what we're trying to do here. We're trying to simulate a swirl or a swivel for our nebula or galaxy, whatever you want to call it here. So let's just set this to 0 first. And we can also change the scale of it. You can see that it kind of moves the light as well, because everything is parented to our null controller here. So let's go ahead and just scale it up a little bit, and we'll just position it kind of in the center. We can always move around with our camera a little bit later here. So let's go ahead and create our Trapcode Particular layer. So create a new solid. We'll call this one main particles. And of course, we'll apply effect, Trapcode Particular. First things first, let's go into the emitter and we'll set the emitter type from point to light. And that's just going to use all of our lights with the name emitter in front of it to emit particles, as you see here. As you can see, the middle light is not producing any particles because the middle light is called null light factory and it doesn't have the prefix emitter here. And that's the reason why we called the emitter. So now that we have that set up, let's go ahead and zero out all the velocities here. So velocity random, we'll just all zero it out. We'll also change the emitter size for now to 25, 25, and 25 here. And now let's go ahead and animate our controller. So first of all, let's go ahead and create that spinning effect here, that spiraling effect. So we'll hit R on the keyboard and the controller. We'll hit a keyframe for the Z rotation. We'll move about 1 second, and we'll just revolve around 2 times, so 2 revolutions. And that's just going to spin our null object 360 degrees twice. And because we're doing that, as you can see, we're kind of getting this nice little circle here. But again, we want a swivel. We want kind of a swirl. So what we can do is we can actually scale the null object down over time. And that's going to create a very unique swirl here. So we'll go to the beginning, hit S on the keyboard. We'll hit a keyframe to scale here. Currently mine's at 300% approximately. We'll move forward to about 1 second where we stopped. And we'll change the scale down. And as you can see, we kind of create a spiral. And that's because we're spinning, but we're also getting smaller and smaller over time because our null object is getting smaller. And that's going to create our paths to be kind of smaller as well. And that's going to create a nice little spiral here. And maybe you can see a little bit better if I go ahead and increase the particle amount. Now you see that we kind of get that particle nebula look here, galaxy look. And we can even go further by swirling it even more, just increase the angle here, something like that. That's looking okay. But as you can see, it stops, and then we have a whole bunch of particles emitting. You can stop the emitter, but all I want to do is I just want to go ahead and freeze it. So we'll go 1 frame before our last keyframe here. We'll go into the main particle in particular. We'll go to physics, and we'll go into the physics time factor here. And we'll set it a keyframe at 1. And then right when our animation stops, we'll move 1 frame forward. And we'll set the physics time factor to 0. And that's just going to freeze everything we just did here. So as you can see, it freezes once the null object stops spinning. So that way we have frozen little nebula here, because most of the time these galaxy things don't really move as we can see them anyways. So now that we have that set up, let's go ahead and adjust some of this stuff. It looks a little bit too uniform. So we'll go into the physics here, we'll go into air, and then we can kind of mess up and scramble all these little particles by kind of increasing the turbulence field. We'll increase the effect position. And that's just gonna mess it up just ever so slightly here. And we'll go into the particles and just adjust some of these individual particle settings. So first of all, let's go ahead and turn the sphere feather down to 25. We don't want it to be too soft here. And then we can go into size. We'll set it to around 2.5, so they're a little bit smaller. We'll also crank up the size randomness. We don't want all these little individual, I guess, solar systems to be equal size. So we'll go ahead and increase the size random so we get some variation here. We'll also change the opacity random so we have more randomness and variation. And now let's go ahead and set up the color. I'm going to select over life, so we can select a gradient here, and we'll go into the color over life. We'll select a preset. Now you can be very specific with this. I'm going to create a 3-way gradient, so very simple. I'm going to select kind of this nice peach kind of color here, and then for the last point here, I'm going to set it to kind of a warmer orange. Of course, you can make your galaxy blue or black or some sci-fi color like Stargate or something like that, but I want to create mine kind of warm here. So just go ahead and tweak with the colors. Of course, you can always go back and change some of these stuff here. So we get these nice variation of warm colors and just a little hint of blue or coolness, just so we have some variation once again. And then of course we can go around, increase the particle amount, go ahead and play around with the emitter size. Remember, this is a 3D particle system, so we're actually getting some 3D depth here. As you can see when I create a camera. Let's go ahead and shut off depth of field for now. And I kind of like to select a pretty wide angle lens just so that we kind of have those natural distortion. After all, this is a very massive, wide space environment here. Let's go ahead and zoom back in. And we can see that if we can rotate, we get a 3D kind of nebula feel here. So let me just go ahead and scale up the background a little bit more. And of course, if you want to rotate the nebula, we can go into the rotation. We can play around with the X rotation here. So now we're really getting kind of that nebula feel. So let's go ahead and fill in the missing gaps here by creating more particles. So let's go ahead and duplicate our main particles. We'll call this one small particles. And these are just going to be the little dust particles floating around the nebula here. So let's go ahead and increase the amount of particles. we can definitely decrease the size to about 1.5 or so. Very, very tiny little particles. We can just mess up with the random seed, so we have variation here. And then we can also maybe apply some velocity to it, maybe around 5, so it's kind of flinging out more. We also want some velocity over motion, maybe 10%, so it kind of spirals out because of the motion. And we can go ahead and play around with the emitter size a little bit, so we have some more variation. And you know, that's looking pretty good. Of course, you can go around and tweak with it. I think I'm just going to leave it at that for now. Let's go ahead and duplicate the main particles one more time. And for this particular layer, I want to create kind of a smoky environment here. So I'm going to call this one smoke particles. And this is going to be kind of our fake dust that we're going to create, or the actual nebula part. So I'm going to go into the, first of all, let's go ahead and decrease the particles per second. We have too much here, so we'll set it to around 120. We'll go change the particle type from sphere to cloudlet. And let's go ahead and jack up the size here. As you can see, we kind of get this huge fume of smoke. And let's go ahead and decrease the opacity by quite a bit, just to kind of create this kind of ring of smoke. And you definitely want to apply some velocity to this thing here. So maybe around 4, velocity for motion 10. A pretty nice wide atmosphere to kind of create more depth to the whole nebula or galaxy here, and just give some more variation once again. Maybe even 2. And feel free to play around with the colors here. I'm just going to leave it as such for the tutorial purposes here. So let's go ahead and fill in the last gap here, which is the nice bright lens flare. So let's go ahead and create a new solid. We'll call this No Light Factory. Now you can apply optical flares. I prefer No Light Factory just because it looks a lot better. So we'll select No Light Factory. We'll check Use Lights. So it's going to use the light here. Now this is our name of our light. So we named our light for our lens flare No Light Factory here. So let's go ahead and define that name and hit OK. And so let's go ahead and change the blending mode from normal to add. And we'll just place it right above all the particles. We'll go into the options and we'll select a nice handy little preset. I'm going to select this Helios preset. Reminds me of helium. And now you're starting to see that we're going to get some nice depth here. Let's go ahead and increase the scale a little bit. And that's looking really great. Now, the whole point of this is to really jack up the particle amount. So let's go ahead into our main particle. We'll jack up the number of particles. You may want to jack up the number of smaller particles to really create a sense of depth here. So I'm going to go back to the controller, and it's kind of small right now. So let me go ahead and maybe hit S, play around with the size a little bit. Yes, this is looking a lot better, more diverse. Jack up the size just a little bit more. And I'm going to go ahead and quickly color correct this thing. So I'm going to go to the space background. As you can see, it doesn't really match quite well. So we'll go apply color correction curves, and maybe we'll warm the background a little bit and decrease the blues. So you can see, very subtle, but it makes a huge difference considering that we just have a plain background in the background. And then, you know, in the original demonstration, I added a glow to this thing. So let's go ahead and apply a effect, stylize glow to the main particles. And definitely play around with the threshold here. You want to create a sense of heat and really increase the radius and increase the intensity a little bit. And then we can apply a glow to the smaller particles. And of course, this will require some tweaking as well. But we'll change these small particles to add, just they blend in a little bit better. And also in the original demonstration, I added shine, a little bit of shine to the main particles here. So let's go and take a look at that. I'm going to apply Trapcode Shine. This is just a Trapcode galore here, man. I mean, everything here is just done by Trapcode. Amazing little plugin suite. So we'll just push the source point down a little bit, and we'll go ahead and tone down the ray length to about 1.5. We'll go into the colorize and maybe change the shadows to a kind of purple color there. And we'll change the midtones to a warmer orange. And then maybe tone down the ray length a little bit. You know, something like that should suffice quite well. There we go. So now it's looking a little bit more epic, and of course you can add more particles and definitely add some depth of field. I'm just going to quickly color correct this a little bit. So let's go to a new adjustment layer. We'll call this CC. And just because I'm lazy, let's go ahead and take a look at Magic Bullet Looks. Amazing little plugin for quick color grading, color correction here. So we'll select a preset. I believe in the original I selected the Vibrant preset, but of course there are tons of presets out here that will definitely give you a unique, different look, and a lot of them look pretty good for this particular case here. So I'm going to select Finished. So kind of a nice little saturation boost as well, some contrast boost here, nothing too major. Let's go ahead and apply my quick InstaFilm script just for the hell of it. So InstaFilm, instant letterboxing here, and a grain layer. I'm going to delete the grain layer a little bit. And just like that, you created your 3D galaxy nebula thing here. Remember, this is a 3D particle system, so all this stuff here is all animatable. And of course, you can enable depth of field. It reacts to all your 3D layers, so you can blend it in with the asteroids that I taught you guys how to do previously in the last tutorial. You can add planets in here, all that stuff using Element. And any other 3D plugins will react just fine with this thing. So have some fun. Definitely experiment. This was a pretty fast run on this, but definitely experiment with it and you'll get some pretty amazing results. So just a really quick tutorial on how to create a fairly basic galaxy nebula type of animation here within After Effects using primarily Trapcode Suite. And it's pretty simple and it looks pretty great for just motion graphics. Of course, this is not very realistic. If you want to create a more realistic galaxy nebula, then I would highly suggest you use a lot of images from NASA, use a lot of layer maps, as well as use stuff like Fume Effects for more realistic smoke generation, stuff like that. But, you know, for just After Effects and Trapcode, this is looking pretty interesting. It should suffice enough for your motion graphics desires for now. So, really quick tutorial. Again, my name is Vincent Nguyen from thecreativedojo.net, and I'll see you guys next time in the next tutorial. Bye, guys.